Remember 6 months ago you came to the office and you were so excited working for Wildwood Cemetery, and you said, "You won't believe this guy I found," and nobody's ever heard of him. And after you told me about Josiah, I said, "We can fix that."
It's true.
And
then all of a sudden, this beautiful mural appeared based on the photograph that we found in the Springfield Republican. So there's a photograph of Josiah Hasbrook, who you can see behind us, who was in the Springfield Republican, 1895, walking in the Memorial Day Parade in Amherst. And I was like, this is crazy. And he's buried in Wildwood Cemetery. And so we went back and we researched, found some articles about him. And then I mentioned it to you, and then all of a sudden you had contacted the family, the Hasbrook family in upstate New York, because we were curious about the fact that Josiah Hasbrook is buried in Wildwood Cemetery in Amherst, and around the corner at UMass there's the Hasbrook Physics Laboratory. And we're thinking, are these people related? And then you went and contacted and talked to the folks.
I thought you knew that before.
Yeah, no, wow. I didn't know if they were related, but I was wondering.
And they're both at Wildwood.
And so the craziest thing is that there's Hasbrooks at Wildwood Cemetery, including Josiah, who was once a slave, or whose parents were a slave, and they were owned by the Hasbrook family in upstate New York, a General Hasbrook. Mm-hmm. And his great-grandson ended up in Amherst in the early 1900s and was an eminent physicist. And we were kind of curious, and we still are, because Josiah lived in Amherst at the same time, was a mail carrier for 8 years in town, and we were wondering, was he delivering mail to the grandson of the slave owner of his family? And so it's just a really great story about Amherst and how rich our community is here.
So tell me about Josiah. He is from upstate New York, and his life, I just couldn't believe somebody like that kind of hero status has died in Amherst unknown.
Yeah, it's really kind of crazy. His family, he grew up with the family of John Brown, the famous abolitionist who was from upstate New York and was terrorizing Kansas in the 1850s, and then was hung at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, for fermenting treasonous insurrection by going around and freeing slaves in the Midwest. So Josiah grew up with his family and was tutored by John Brown's daughters. And then when John Brown was hung, Josiah went down to Harper's Ferry and escorted John Brown's wife back up to upstate New York, and then took her out to California to her one surviving son, because her other sons were hung with John Brown. And then he came back and settled in Amherst, became a mail carrier, owned a lumber yard.
Started a wood and lumber business,
exactly.
Which is just so Mill District. We had to.
Exactly. And so it's really
so
kind of fascinating. African American Amherst resident, his mother and father were slaves.
But also we found out he enlisted in the Revolution, in the Civil War.
That's right.
And he didn't have to. He was free, and he enlisted. He went to South Carolina after the war was over.
No, during the war.
During the war?
Yeah, no, he fought.
But after he stayed.
Right.
And he told all the people he could find that they were free, and he gave them whatever means they needed to get out, because so many people were stuck after the war. So this local hero.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, he enlisted in the famous Massachusetts Colored Regiment.
Okay.
As a number of African Americans from Amherst did, and fought in the Battle of Sullivan's Island in South Carolina. And then after the war was over, as you said, he stayed and he helped free blacks get their footing, and many of them emigrating back up to the north. And then he came back up and settled in Amherst.
So cool.
It's a great story. There's a lot of great stories. And actually, the capper of it all was Cinda and I are chatting with our friend Nina. And Nina says, "Josiah Hasbrook, I live in his house." And so Josiah used to own a house and live on Baker Street in Amherst, and which is a traditional west part of town where there was an African American community. And it was amazing that Nina actually said, and I've got some of his stuff in my basement.
Oh my God!
And so
exciting.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
And that's one of the powers of living in a small town. There's no doubt
Well,
about
and
it.
I was so
Internet.
excited about this because what I really want to do with Wildwood is to find people like this
Exactly.
with stories
Yes.
and highlight them.
There are
this
so
is-
many
this is
stories.
Give us a
nice
Wildwood
start.
marker. Can
Yeah.
can tell us where can we find Josiah today?
Well, so it's a little difficult to find, but when you come in the main entrance, you have to bear right, and it's on the far right, right
Up against
near
the woods, right?
Yeah, right
Yeah.
up against the woods, right soon after the monuments start. But I can, if people call me, I can let
Is
them
it
know.
on the internet too? So you
I
can
will
look
It
it up?
make
will
sure
be.
that-
It
yeah,
will
yeah,
be.
yeah.
We'll
And
link to
it's
you.
funny.
We're working on that.
Both
That's so
sides,
cool.
the slave owning and the slave side of the family, are both buried
are
in
both
Wildwood.
there. Because
And
Wildwood never discriminated. We're non-denominational.
Exactly.
We're buried.
And next we'll talk to you about Mal Brown, who's another African American buried in the cemetery. He was the first African American to graduate from Providence College from Amherst.
Nice.
So anyway, Wildwood, come visit. It's a
Come
great place
visit.
to hang out.
Thank you, Bear.
Thank you, Cinda.
Yeah,
This is
thank
great.
you, Cinda.
And the beautiful art.
It's what it is, but
It's
we're
beautiful.
recognizing him.
Exactly.
Happy to do that.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Crazy
Oh.
stuff.
This is fun.